What a turnaround from what this market was signaling just a few hours ago.
Yeah, just a few minutes ago, I was saying, the S&P and the Nasdaq 100 were still in the red, even though they were off their worst levels. But right now, we've got the S&P 500 actually up 11 points. So we're seeing, Romaine, some buying here into the close.
Look, I'm not going to. Alex isn't here, so one of you is going to talk about the bond market. That's certainly a big part of the story today, Vonnie. We'll see what happens later this week when we get CPI also. Could this be a peak on the 10-year yield, at least for this cycle?
Well, I'm not calling it, Tim. You can if you want, but there's no way I'm making that call. Tell you what, though, if you look at the map of the equity market today, particularly the S&P 500, Romaine was just mentioning it, we are looking at companies that we probably haven't had to say the name of in a long time. Materials companies like Corteva, for example, doing well. Industrials doing well. Energy doing well on the back of higher energy prices, oil and natural gas, it should be said. And, financials, we're about to head into financials earnings season. Real estate too, interestingly. And
the question is whether or not that's a good sign. 6 of the 7 of the Mag 7 in the red on the day, yet you still have a market here now holding into the green with just about a few seconds left before the bells. We should point out the VIX, which had been elevated earlier in the day, trading above 22, now back down to that 19 level, and similar strength that you saw in the dollar, fading just a touch here on this Monday afternoon. The closing bells giving folks, a little bit to cheer about. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, that's your primary gainer on the day, up about 0.9% as we wait for these numbers to settle. A gain of more than 300 points, about 361 points. We should point out Dow Transport's also up about 0.9% as well. The S&P 500 looks like it's going to close higher by roughly 9 points, right around 58.36, up about 0.2%. The Nasdaq Composite and the Nasdaq 100, those are your two outliers. Both going to close in the red, down about 3 to 0.4%. And the Russell 2000, which earlier in the day was down about 11% from that intraday high that it hit back in November, clawing its way back into the green, a gain today of 5 points or 0.2%.
Wow, interesting to see this move around, and you wonder about what was that late market sentiment. I'm looking at the S&P 500 once again, and you have most names, Vonnie, in the index higher today, 377 to be exact, 123 to the downside, 3 unchanged.
Yeah, and if you look at the map, as I was saying, all of those energy-related names, all of those deal-related names are higher, and that's pushing some of those sectors higher that you haven't seen higher in a while, like industrials, energy, healthcare, for example, financials. But you also have those lower information technology down 0.9%, utilities, and we all know why that is, down 1.2%. We were speaking with Pedro Pizarro earlier on a very, very difficult situation out in Los Angeles, and of course that is impacting the entirety of the utilities sector today.
Yeah, certainly keeping a watch on it. I'm looking at that IMAP, a lot of green out there. Let me get to some of the individual gainers, and one of them has to do with a deal that actually happened today. Intracellular, that stock up almost 34%. J&J agreeing to acquire Intracellular Therapies. It's a company focused on treatments for the central nervous system disorders. The purchase price, $14.6 billion or $132 a share. So that's about a 39% premium above the closing price on Friday. Bloomberg, by the way, earlier reported a deal was in the works, so coming to fruition on this Monday. Also, we watched a lot of the healthcare pharma space, JP Morgan Healthcare Conference underway. But Humana was actually in the news, along with a lot of other healthcare plans, I should say, health insurers in particular. So Humana and others with Medicare Advantage plans. Humana alone up almost 7% in today's session. United Health was also climbing. This is after Medicare released a proposed plan that could allow an increase in 2026 payments for the companies. So that explains a big bump in that sector. And then, Vonnie, you mentioned the energy space. We saw energy bump up, newer restrictions when it comes to Russia, some sanctions that we got. And so there's some concerns about the supply. Russia, of course, one of the world's top producers. Well, Baker Hughes up about 3.6%. It's an oil field services and equipment company. It was one of the top gainers in the NASDAQ 100. Susquehanna raising the firm's price target on Baker Hughes to $53 a share. Stock closing just under $45 a share in today's session and keeping a positive rating on the share. So that was one of the other individual gainers in today's session. Tim, over to you.
Okay, those stocks in the green. How about some in the red today? Apple among those mega cap tech stocks driving the S&P 500 and NASDAQ lower today. Finishing the day down by a little over 1%. We got some news early today that Apple sold 5% fewer iPhones around the world. It lost ground to those Chinese rivals in the last quarter of 2024. This according to data from Counterpoint Research. Analysts say this was partly due to the lack of availability of Apple intelligence features in China, But one thing we also know is that those Chinese-made smartphones that are competing with Apple, with Samsung, like Xiaomi, for example, and also Vivo, are starting to eat into those companies' business. Apple down by a little over 1% today. Shares of Moderna absolutely sank today at one point to their lowest level going back to April of 2020. Yes, that was before the company even came out with its COVID vaccine that propelled it to a household name. The company cut its revenue guidance for the year. It missed the average analyst estimate. Right now, the company is struggling with slow demand for the COVID vaccine and slow demand for the RSV vaccine. Shares down today by close to 17%. And finally, watching shares of Sonos after we got the news early this morning that Patrick Spence, after 8 years as CEO, is out at the company. He's been there for about a dozen years. The stock initially jumped after that report, but then there was this pullback in the market. It fell as much as close to 11%. It clawed back from those losses this afternoon. Tom Conrad, you know him from Pandora. He was a executive at Snap. He's going to be interim CEO. I don't have to tell you if you are a Sonos customer. There have been lots of frustrations with the app update and Patrick Spence out as a culmination of those issues. Romaine, go ahead.
All right, I just want to get to some breaking news here. Another mover. This is an after hours. Angie. It's a small cap. Shares up about 9%. The company will be spun off. Remember, this is a company controlled by Barry Diller's IAC. The company has announced plans to formally spin off Angie. IAC is also saying that the CEO of IAC, Joey Levin, will depart after that spinoff. And they're saying in the press release that they do not plan to appoint a new CEO and that the CFO and COOs of those companies will report directly to Barry Diller, who is, of course, the chairman of the company. So effectively, they're saying that there won't be a CEO. We'll see how long that lasts. But of course, probably more significant for Angie investors, a spinoff of that company, something that's been long talked about here, piecing apart this empire that Barry Diller has built. Meanwhile, we do want to turn back to the yield space. We talked a lot about how the move in yields has been driving the move in the markets. And I want you to take a look at that 10-year yield, 4.78 and change right now, up about 3 basis points. And this is now the 7th straight day that we've seen a rise in 10-year yields. We haven't had a sell-off like this since at least May of 2023. You saw similar moves across the yield curve here. Your 5-year up about 3 basis points, your 30-year up about 2, your 2-year, that's the most rate sensitive, of course, only up about 1 basis point on the day.
Yeah, a lot of certainly, whether it's inflation, concerns about the deficit, right, and other pressures certainly weighing on the U.S. Treasury trade. Having said that, let's get to some of the stories that are on top of mind, or at least just caught our attention on this Monday. And this one, I think, is maybe for you, Romaine. Ryanair coming out and demanding airport booze limits to deter unruly flyers.
So it's fired, literally.
2-drink minimum, or maximum, I should say. 2-drink, minimum.
There we go.
Some might say you need a couple drinks to.
Oh, man. It's only Monday, everybody. 2-drink maximum at airports to reduce passenger disruptions and improve behavior on flights. Listen, they're talking about one incident back in April of 2024, Tim, that resulted in about $15,000 in extra expenses.
Isn't this more like? Isn't this more a question for Vonnie? I mean, she's from Ireland. This is an Irish carrier. I'm not going to go there, but
there is no one
Vonnie,
like
do you
the
want to go there?
Irish to know our limits. We know our limits. I think we can safely say that about the generalized Irish population of the globe. But the other thing, Carol,
I couldn't do that to you, Vonnie. I just couldn't do it to you.
Well, the thing is, Romaine would never ever travel Ryanair. It's a budget carrier, right?
Gosh, are you kidding me? Yeah.
Exactly.
He wouldn't be caught dead in a Ryanair airplane.
I stick to the Gulfstream. You know that. I mean, look, you got to do something to kind of keep passengers in check. And let's face it, this isn't just a problem at Ryanair. I think we've all seen this on other airlines as well. I don't know. I don't know if a limit is the answer, but you got to try something, I guess.
They start doing crazy things when they're drinking too much, like throwing their iPhones.
No,
I'm just making that up. I was trying to give you a segue.
It is funny that you mentioned iPhones, Carol. I know you put that in there for me especially as well, because we were just chatting earlier about how, interesting it is that the numbers are dropping in China, particularly, and that's impacting the stock. Tim, you mentioned it earlier as, a faller. I mean, obviously, there are all sorts of other phones, and Chinese phones from Xiaomi and so on are extraordinarily popular in China, but this seems to be exacerbating and getting more exacerbated by the fact that Apple Intelligence, their AI offering, wasn't even available in China yet.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a big part of this, but also I think a bigger part of this has to do with the iPhone's competitors that are made in China that you can get for less money hold a really good candle to what you can get from Apple right now. And I'm wondering if, the days of Apple being the runaway leader in that country, if those days are numbered.
Yeah, it's a good question, right? We've always talked about how important the market is. We talked with our Mark Gurman, though, and he said, kind of get ready for 2025. There's some interesting stuff coming our way out of Apple. So we'll see whether or not that picks up some of the slack, maybe with maybe lower iPhone sales, at least globally and in China. All right, we got to run. That's a wrap. Across platform, radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We call it the closing bell. We'll see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.